Having learnt belatedly his first lesson, that he's a human student, not a goat, he and his old keeper, Max Spielman, apply themselves to his post-Kidley education. "We got catching up to do," Max declared. "What we'll do, we'll study the university in general and you in particular. Then when we find out what you want to do in the university, we'll study that." "I already know what I want to do," I said. "I want to be a great student and pass all my tests. I want to make Westcac," that's the computer that runs the show, "tell me about my parents and punish your enemies." It was explained to me then that unlike the goats, whose one desire, if something unconscious may be called that, was to be supremely goatish, human beings did not aspire to be supremely human. Rather, they chose some single activity of life, such as watching stars or making music, and strove for excellence there exclusively, ignoring the rest. This notion of majors and vocations was not easy for me to understand. Bricket Ranunculus had been a stud, that is, a major, as it were, in the impregnation of nannies. But his excellence in this line was a feature of his goatly magnificence in general, just as Mary Appenzeller's record milk yield was of hers. Neither virtue was a matter of election, and neither was developed at the expense of other merits. On the contrary, why needed the case be different with humans, I wanted to know? Was not an unathletic scientist as inconceivable as a barren milch goat? Alas, you see, I was not always a ready and tractable student. My Grand Gruffian resolve I still officially subscribe to, but as much to spite Max as to do him honor, for he himself most gently pointed out, as did the passing years, its boyishness. Westcac was no troll, I came to understand, unless metaphorically, and with figurative monsters one did not do literal battle, the only sort I had a taste for. It was as evident to me as to him that the real task before us was the unglamorous one of making up for the lost years of my kidship. In principle, I was eager to learn all I could about the mysterious real university of human studentdom, but in fact, however genuine curiosity, pride balked at the knowledge that I could never truly catch up with my future classmates. I would not ever be like them. Surely I would fail all my examinations and pass none. Mixed with my gratitude, therefore, for Max's devotion to my tutelage was resentment that he'd not schooled me with my fellow humans from the first. Never mind that I owed him my life, if thanks to his way of preserving it I must work harder than the others. Thus the fondness I acquired for disputation was not altogether honorable. There was something in it of pure captiousness. On the other hand, I labored under bona fide handicaps. My quickest progress was in mathematics, formal logic, grammar, and theoretical science, subjects which required for their understanding no particular involvement in human affairs, but their very abstraction from the realm of student experience made them uninteresting to me. More engrossing were matters of physical nimbleness, wherein my former goatship was often an asset. I enjoyed not only gymnastic and wrestling, which I learned from good G. Harold, that's his assistant keeper, in happier days an athlete and still adept, despite his age and madness, but also tool work, handicrafts of every sort, and even music, which I played upon a row of elderberry twigs I'd fashioned into little pipes. Yet in the fields where I was most inclined to forage, I showed least aptitude. My first exposure to the written word, those sessions in the hemlock grove with Lady Creamhair, when she read me the Founder's Saga and Tales of the Trustees, affected me more deeply than I could have supposed. I still preferred literature to any other subject, and the old stories of adventure to any other literature, but my response to them was by no means intellectual. I couldn't have cared less what light they shed on student cultures in ancient terms, or what their place was in the history of West Campus art. Though my eyes and ears were keen enough, I took no interest in stylistics, allegorical values, or questions of form. All that mattered was the hero's performance. The fable of the wolf and the kid, for example, I could recite from start to finish, as I could 100 others whose plots were as familiar as the paths of our pasture, and yet not remember the author's name. Precisely and with real indignation, I delivered the kid's immortal rooftop denunciation of the passing wolf, but wit always hath an answer seemed as apt a moral for the tale as it's easy to be brave from a distance. Even where memory served, interpretation would fail me, especially when the point of a story had to do with human notions of right and wrong instead of practical experience. I could not agree with Max, for instance, that the kid had behaved improperly. If it was true that bravery is easier at a distance, and one wished to display bravery, ought not one to maintain one's distance, as did that worthy youngster? Or granting with the fox who would not enter the lion's den that it's simpler to get into the enemy's toils than out again, which sentiment, as Max explained it, seemed quite to contradict the previous one, should not the fox have sprung more readily to do hero work in the cave? Oh boy, Max would sigh. More seriously, inasmuch as the quads of New Tammany College, not to mention Remus and classical Lycaon, were remoter to my experience than the Troll Bridge and cabbage fields of the Misters Gruff, I was disposed to approach the events of history as critically as those of fiction. No use Max reminding me of political necessities or historical contexts. If a certain chancellor had prudently done Y, where my favorite dean errant would impetuously have done X, I lost all regard for the man and was liable to see no point in studying his administration. It defied all narrative logic that a fearless geographer could survive every peril of storm and savage in his circumnavigation of the campus, only to succumb to a stupid illness during the last leg of the voyage. What mortal difference did it make that that's the way it was, as Max insisted? It's not the way it should have been, and since names and dates were as beside the point for me as the color of Willie Gruff's eyes, I was inclined either to forget the whole business or amend it to suit my taste. No firmer was my purchase on economics, physiology, or moral philosophy, and even my competence in physics, for example, was pejorated by my attitude. At best, I found it moderately poetic that every action had an equal and opposite reaction, or that an embryo's gestation repeated the evolution of its phylum. For the most part, I regarded natural laws with the same provisional neutrality with which one regards the ground rules of a game or the exposition of a fable, and the reflection that one had no choice of games whatever when so many others were readily imaginable could bring me on occasion to severe melancholy. Indeed, if I never came truly to despair at the awful arbitrariness of facts, it was because I never more than notionally accepted them. The Encyclopedia Tamanica I read from Aardvark to Zymergy in quite the same spirit as I read the old school tales, prefacing each entry, "Once upon a time."